George Harrison is a writer based in Norwich. His short fiction has been published by Reflex Press and the Literary Platform, and he is the co-author of Inside Allenwood, a work of narrative nonfiction about life in an American prison published by Quiller. George pays the rent with writing, ghostwriting, and editing work. He is interested in economics and culture, and for better or worse, is a lifelong fan of Norwich City Football Club. These themes and interests often crop up in his fiction, which is generally defined by a strong sense of place and a sprinkling of surreality. He has been mentored by Michael Doncor. Please welcome him to the stage.
Thank you. So I'm going to give a reading from Season, which is a literary novel about loneliness, obsession, and Premier League football. And this is a chapter called Optimism. Something had snapped within the young man. He realized that without being able to pinpoint quite when or how, but suspecting he knew why, he had crossed an internal Rubicon. His old coping strategies, his regimen of forced ignorance, of distracting himself with the football, no longer worked. And so he had resolved that time had come for drastic action. He stood waiting by the printer. There was a spooling noise and a flashing of lights, and then out came the letter. The paper was warm. He looked at his watch. A few hours yet until the weekend, but first he had to hand in the letter. They were playing at home. It was something to look forward to. But really, seriously, he had to get the letter out of the way first. The young man's resignation letter had been waiting in his inbox for a long time. He always knew he would be grateful for it one day. It was like how spies used to carry a cyanide pill in case they were captured. Maybe, against the backdrop of the Second Cold War, they would again. For the young man, the letter was his own way out, a means of escape. Although with his meagre savings, it wasn't clear where exactly he was escaping to. Anywhere, he supposed, would be better than this. The thought was cheering, and he found himself smiling as he reread the words, the warmth of the paper comforting against his fingers. What he really wanted to do in that moment was thank her, because if it hadn't been for her, he doubted he would have ever found the courage to make this change. It was a big deal what he was doing, like substituting your keeper before a cup final shootout. And without the impetus of her breakup, he certainly wouldn't have thought to do this now, in the current climate, with times of shortages and suffering not far off, a difficult winter looming at the end of the year. But for now, he was happy, and it took all his restraint not to write her a message telling her as much. The paper in his hands, its warmth slowly fading, prompted a sensory echo. Her hand in his as they pushed through a train station crowd, their big away day in the capital. The smoothness of her palm, just faintly slick where her nerves had got the better of her. From there, it was easy to make the leap to the badly bitten nails, the feel of those fine hairs on her arms, the way they caught the light, her laugh. And then the scars beneath the hairs, those tracts of ghost skin and inheritance from earlier days, and the ways her moods could pivot drastically with only the slightest trigger, euphoria and dysphoria married in the same minute. He had to make allowances for her, he remembered, shaking off the memories before they got too deep into him. And yet he knew that despite how it ended, she would not have begrudged him his happiness in this moment. Match day, and the young man celebrating his newfound freedom in the concourse. He was a little woozy when he emerged at last into the sunlight, concrete steps flaring harshly beneath his feet, the yellow of the seats a distinct provocation. He regretted not wearing a cap. He regretted also not having eaten earlier that day, but he was wise enough not to place his faith in any of the reheated and overpriced fare they sold inside the ground. He would simply have to push through. "You're looking chipper today," said the old man, he who knew all about pushing through, he who had endured a lifetime of it. "Thanks," said the young man. He grinned. Then he shucked off his jacket and dumped it in the fold of his seat. He shielded his eyes with his hand, surveying the pitch, various officials and staff buzzing around with their clipboards and radios and telephones. The young man smiling still, head swimming, acting like the whole scene was there just for him, arranged solely for his pleasure. The stadium and the staff and the fans and even the sunlight on his bare arms. Who did he think he was, that young man? Nelson? No matter, because now he lowered his hand and turned back to the old man. "How's things?" the young man asked. "Same as ever," said the old man. But perhaps the young man's exuberance was catching, because today the old man smiled to show that this was not necessarily a bad state of being, not always. "Score?" I don't know, so long as we get something from this, I'll be happy. The old man shook his head. He said, it doesn't even matter how we go about it now, does it? So long as we don't get sucked in. Because if you ask me, it feels like it's going to be tighter at the end than anyone realizes. And I don't know if we're really good enough to be in this league anymore. The old man sighed. Still, he added, I think it would finish me off if we went down now, after the season we've been having. The young man smiled. He had never known the old man to say so many words at once. He wondered whether everything was richer in texture today because he had left his job. The music seemed to come crisper from the speakers. The moulded plastic of the seat felt harsher and more inhospitable than usual, even through the padding of his jacket. The players would be out any minute. They would line up as they always did and shake hands. The fans would sing. The young man knew well how it went. As he watched the mouth of the tunnel, waiting for something to happen, the young man made a game of picturing the hourglass of his savings, money slipping like sand with each passing day. But he had to work his notice period first. He could worry about what might come next after he had caught his breath. Then the announcer's voice came over the loudspeaker, stating that the players were in the tunnel. It was nearly time for kick-off, time to make some noise. The young man felt himself slipping back into the moment, a numbing comfort not dissimilar to sinking into a warm bath. He realized then that it might not matter even if he ran out of money. The team might be relegated by then, or else the war might expand and suck in everyone else, the fate of the species in the hands of a few gamblers. This prospect did not unsettle him as it once had. Some people were saying that energy rationing might be introduced on the continent. The Americans, meanwhile, were insisting that there was no blockade. There had never been a blockade. The significance of this was lost on the young man, newly jobless, who was just trying to live while he was alive. That was his new philosophy. It was why he stood and belted the club's song with such enthusiasm when the players came out. And yes, his exuberance was definitely catching. Today, the old man clapped his hands above his head and joined in the singing. They knew a couple more wins would keep them safe in the division. It was just a question of getting some momentum going again. The young man sung throughout the first half. He didn't always sing so much at home games. He usually saved his voice to when they were playing away, when you had to bring the noise yourself because nobody else was going to sing for you. But today he was content to sing. The old man kept looking at the young man like something had gotten into him. He was not surprised when the young man rose unsteadily to his feet at half-time, announcing his intention to head back in for another pint or two. When the young man came back, he looked like he'd been drinking something harder than that, and he almost tripped on the stairs on his way up. A steward was keeping an eye on him, as was the old man. But it didn't matter, not today. A quiet voice at the back of the young man's head told him he was only mortgaging his happiness from the following days and weeks. But when he sang louder, the voice went away. He knew he had to enjoy moments like these while he could. In the second half, the away fans thought they had scored. Indeed, the ball was in the net, but the linesman had his flag up. Their forward had been offside. The young man had looked straight to the linesman as the ball went in, but the away fans, in their jubilation, seemed not to notice. They were granted a few seconds of exuberant celebration before they realized the goal would not stand. At this, the mass of away fans quieted suddenly, and the home fans started cheering instead, delighting in the scratching of the goal and the embarrassment of the opposition. The young man nudged the old man and pointed to the away block. A grotesquely fat man in the front row had taken off his shirt, but with the goal chalked out, he was now busy putting it back on. He became briefly entangled in the sleeves, a knot of polyester and surplus flesh, and, the young man suspected, shame. Jeers started in the terrace, a fresh chant directed towards the away fans. The young man inhaled deeply. What a day, he said. And it was true that he was enjoying himself, that he had allowed his worries to be smothered by the match, the way the Dutchman rushed out now to smother a fresh attack, diving on the ball at the feet of the opposition forward and earning his warm applause from the stands. Things couldn't be all that bad, the young man supposed, if the football was still going ahead. But at the other end of the pitch, momentarily unseen by the young man, the Finn was rolling around and holding his ankle. Something had happened off the ball. The German was at the board of the technical area, shouting at the referee and the fourth official and anyone else who would listen, telling them to stop play, pointing frantically at the Finn. The young man clapped his hands and joined in another song. He let the music rise all around him, felt rather than heard the beat of the drum, and just for a moment he forgot where he was. It seemed nothing could spoil his day. But then the board went up, and the Finn was stretchered off the field, and a late flurry of goals saw them lose 3-0.